Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could teach the gullible to never be so comfortable with lies they eat like comfort food? To disregard the bogus claims and pseudoscientific claims, can you imagine just how much indeed the world would change? No more political predators playing on the populace, but ilkas and plots to shift and kill metropolis. No more villains with the title in the Bible, holding phony temper Bibles like the stuff they teach is vital. Imagine it was normal to have to prove a claim you make, and folks really feel ashamed expressing content that was fake. It's not to say we never make mistakes, it's just to say we go out of our way to show the evidence it takes.
Remain skeptical while you travel the road, the reason stay strapped with logic and facts. That's what it is, yo. Keep reality intact to help the truth grow. Question every claim, especially the ones you believe in. Remain skeptical while you travel the road, the reason.
Hello, welcome to Road to Reason, a skeptic's guide to the 21st century. I'm Rob Penzak.
I'm Stephanie Guttormson.
And we are going to be joined by Richard Yeagley a little bit later. He's the producer and director of a documentary about conversion therapy called The Sunday Session. So we'll be back with him about 10 or 12 minutes. Stephanie, you want to get us started off with some news?
I will get us started off with some news. As you guys may or may not know, hopefully you do, but the Trump administration in the I guess in the auspices of the Health and Human Services Department, has repealed or removed the contraceptive mandate for the ACA, also known as the Affordable Care Act, because of religious reasons, or what we can assume are religious reasons, pandering to the religious right there. The contraceptive mandate was required employers to provide affordable affordable contraceptives to women in the workplace, and now an employer, for any reason, religious or otherwise, as long as it's moral objections.
Right, and to think of the harm, if we have 300 and something million people in the United States, and half of those are women, this isn't even going after a fringe group, which a lot of times people tend to do.
Yeah.
This is something that, whatever your political persuasion, whether you're progressive or conservative, you would think that you would care that all these people in your life are going to be dramatically affected by this, and to take your own personal religious values or moral, everybody can have their own separate moral values. Do you want to give your family's right and your friends' rights to a random group? Right now, it's the Christian conservatives have all this power. How would these people feel when somebody else is making decisions for them?
Yeah, one good quote from one of the response from the Center for Inquiry came from Nick Little, our lawyer, who had said that this administration has determined that a woman's access to affordable essential health care must be subordinated to the religious whims of her employer. And I don't think you could say it better than that. This ruling from the Trump administration is just one in a long line of things that they're trying to undo from the Obama era.
Yeah, it's
unprecedented. I understand you don't like your predecessor, but to just really just upend.
Yeah, this is one of many things that, as the religious right, even though the amount of religious people gets smaller and smaller, the religious right now is in such a position of power because they helped put Trump into his position, despite every critical thinker or just typical people listening to what he says, looking at him, saying this guy is the most unqualified person we've ever seen, and the most vitriolic and psychiatrically unstable, like all these problems, and yet the religious right put him in power, and now they're reaping their reward.
To be fair, Jesus would fit all those descriptors too.
All right. We'll have to argue whether or not he was historically real. Trump, sadly, is real. The next piece of news, this also comes from Center for Inquiry. If you're ever looking for kind of interesting secular news and information, CFI is a great place, American Humanist Association. Do try to check some of these places out to see what's going on. So this has to do with a memo circulated by Attorney General Jefferson Sessions to the Orwellian-flavored Department of Justice is where this came from. It's entitled Federal Law Protections for Religious Liberty, because clearly religion is not getting enough protection and liberty at this point.
No, it's not.
So the memo prioritizes religious faith at every level of government action, granting religious individuals, organizations, and for-profit corporations unprecedented freedom to place their religious beliefs above the nation's laws and the rights of other citizens, and to even be eligible for taxpayer funds for doing so. This was issued in accord with President Trump's instructions in his executive order promoting free speech and religious liberty. So how does this tie into Title VII?
So Title VII, the prohibition is the prohibition on sex discrimination. The previous administration, also known as the Obama administration, had concluded that the Civil Rights Act of 1964, Title VII of that, which protects sex, would be also granted to transgender people. This person, whose name Jeff Sessions, is that his name? Jeff Sessions decided that it doesn't include transgender status. But that doesn't really follow. If it's a sex issue, then the sex issue is coming before the gender issue, and so you're discriminating based on sex to begin with. So I don't know how they came to that conclusion.
Yeah,
to be quite honest with you.
I mean, I think that we've seen, you know, and even in the judiciary, that smart people can argue almost whatever they want. So instead of the facts determining a case, if you get the right people or the wrong people appointed to courts and positions of power, they can decide whatever they want, and they often do. And that's part of the thing that's so troubling with all these religious appointees that, you know, the Trump administration is putting in power, and then that, you know, Jeff Sessions, Mike Pence, all these people will have power, and they get to have people in these slots that make terrible decisions that you can all look at and say, this is factually wrong for these reasons, here's the precedent. But then if you have a Supreme Court that's stacked with religious conservatives, they can always find a way to sort of wheedle around the actual law and, you know, support what they want.
That is troubling. I would say that Sessions, of those in power, is probably one of the most religious in his cabinet, at least overtly. And he is also, to me, he seems to be the most motivated. Because I think a lot of the stuff that's come out has come out because of him.
Although, we'll see with Mike Pence, you know, it's part of the problem. Even if Trump did get thrown out for various things, I'm not sure how much better off we'll be in certain regards with Mike Pence there. What, you know, he might be able to pass as a sentient being better than Trump can, but he has some really disturbing views, and, you know, we'll get into some of those when we talk about conversion therapy.
I'm not here to defend Mike Pence, but if you ask me what I would rather have, possible nuclear war, or someone that at least has the decorum to not be a jerk in public constantly, I'll take the latter.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
It's fun. In some ways, I mean, I think he's less likely to, get us in a nuclear war. On the other hand, there is a danger of having people that are articulate who are at the same time pushing for a very regressive agenda.
Absolutely.
Because most people can look at Trump and say, holy cow, what's going on? People are activated by that. When you get somebody who at least has the veneer of a civil person, you might not get that same level of reaction, but they might not destroy us as quickly too. So following up with Sessions, during his confirmation hearing, he had said that he wasn't sure whether secular people could claim to understand the truth as well as a religious person. This kind of reminded me of George Bush Sr., who wasn't sure if an atheist should count as a good citizen. It's good to see us marching backward like that.
I love the comment about truth, though, because I can almost guarantee you, and this is what I mean when I say Jeff Sessions is extremely religious, that Jeff Sessions sees his mission as a religious one. Very few of the rest of the cabinet, I think, is like that. He's unique in his fervor, where I think he actually believes the things, whereas Trump is just using the people who believe the things.
Yes, I think that's a good point. That Trump, who knows if he has any religious convictions at all, but he's certainly pandering to the right. There's an article by Michael Stone where he notes that Donald Trump was the first sitting president to ever attend the Values Voter Summit, which Stone notes is stocked by anti-Christian or by anti-gay Christian extremists. And again, now they're going to be front and center, and you're getting a voice of real fringe hate groups that now can have center stage in shaping policy.
Yeah, I mean, the Valley Voter Summit, as you mentioned, has only ever been visited by candidates, but once they become president, they back away from it because a lot of the groups in there are hate groups, if not all of them, to be quite honest.
Now, just to show that you don't have to be a religious zealot to be wrong about something, you want to close with a story that wasn't religious?
Sure. There was a woman in Michigan who was jailed for refusing to vaccinate her son by court order. Now, her and her husband, or her now ex-husband, had a custody agreement that included getting their son vaccinated. When she refused to do this, the court found her in contempt, jailing her for 7 days. Her son is 9 years old, who she's refusing to vaccinate here. And Michigan parents are legally allowed to skip or delay their child's vaccinations for personal beliefs. But she ran afoul of the law because she didn't honor an agreement that was done in court with her husband.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just, the whole thing with anti-vax is it really shows the harm that you can do to other people. When somebody, and this is why critical thinking is so important, why educating ourselves scientifically, gaining some literacy is critical, that it's bad enough when somebody does something dumb and it hurts themselves. When they do something dumb and it hurts other people, now it's other people's problems, and that's where the government, hopefully a good government, steps in and sets it up so we can have a good, healthy society. And when you get these kind of people that we have now running government, we're in a lot of trouble.
That's accurate. I don't have much more I can add to that except that the anti-vaccine movement is one of those movements that typifies that believing things for bad reasons is probably the worst thing you can do, because it goes to what you said. It doesn't just harm yourself. You think your belief in chakras or whatever isn't harmful. Especially when it comes to vaccines, you're essentially telling people to not get scientifically proven medical care.
Yeah. And a lot of these people stumble into it, out of a kid or friend's kid. Somebody had this terrible thing happen, autistic, and they don't start as devious, bad people. They just are ignorant of the science and they misunderstand things, and then they don't educate themselves on all the available material, and they don't trust the scientists over the religious leaders or whoever's telling them, the nonsense, and it leads to a tremendous amount of harm.
I mean, I see it as them just, they love their kids, and they want to do the best for their kids. The problem is they don't believe the right things about the world, right? To do that, so they don't trust science or scientists, which I can't. These are the same people who use cell phones every day. I don't understand how they don't.
Yeah. Well,
science.
So speaking of trusting science, we're not drawing any conclusions from this next thing. The evidence is not all in.
That's true.
However, Stephanie, you did tell me something about our current presidency and condom size, that there's at least a correlation, and we don't know if it's, so what is that?
Now, like you said, this is not causal. At least we can't say for now.
Not for sure.
But condom sizes are being reduced. That's true. What we don't know is whether Trump's presidency has anything to do with it. The reason I bring that up is because this didn't happen in any other presidency prior to Trump's. His hands are smaller.
He's got the little micro hands.
Yeah, so it might be to
So
help
who knows?
that.
We're just raising the issue. We don't really know if it's related. And with that, we'll be back after public service announcement with Richard Yeagley.
When I was younger, I didn't want to admit I had a serious disease. Because of my diabetes, I lost the sight in my left eye. Misconceptions continue to surround this monster public health issue, but the simple truth is, diabetes can often be prevented and complications avoided. You're not alone. Understand the realities of diabetes and know that you can manage it and lead a full, active life.
There's an alarming trend in the world today. Everywhere you go, people are saying that cinema is dead. But cinema is not dead. My name is Count Simon Gauntley, and on my television program, Count Gauntley's Horrors from the Public Domain, I make it my mission to resurrect forgotten film classics. I promise to dredge the sewers and ford the stagnant streams of film history to ensure that no film is truly lost to the ages. Count Gauntley and FPA, keeping cinema alive! Alive! Alive!
Well, even though Joseph's been gone 18 months, we've made the decision to keep all his things as they were when he was here last. I finally just packed his toothbrush away like 6 months ago. It had been sitting on the counter in the bathroom. And I was cleaning the bathroom one day and I just thought, okay, it's time to put the toothbrush in the medicine cabinet.
So, I just moved in with this family, and it's embarrassing. The little one, he likes to go outside and crawl around in the giant litter box. I don't know what he's doing. I mean, I was born and I knew how to use the litter box. Look at that. That's disgusting. Oh, poop already. You're making me nervous. Oh, okay, I can't look at this anymore. I really hope he grows out of this, for his sake.
This is Richard Dawkins. Doing commercials is unfamiliar territory for me, but I'm inviting you to watch Road to Reason, a skeptic's guide to the 21st century, on Fairfax Public Access every Sunday. Each week, the hosts tackle wishful thinking, religion, pseudoscience, and the harm they cause, with a combination of facts, humor, and community involvement. They challenge believers to defend their faith and give you, the skeptic, a voice. With live call-ins for viewers and streaming on the World Wide Web, there's never a dull moment. Don't wait. Look at them now on Facebook and YouTube, and remember to watch Road to Reason, a skeptic's guide to the 21st century, or there'll be hell to pay.
All right, welcome back to Road to Reason, a skeptic's guide to the 21st century. We're joined now by Richard Yeagley. He's the producer and director of the Sunday Sessions, which is a documentary about conversion therapy. He's also the founder of Dickey Bruce Productions, a company which specializes in production, marketing, and release of nonfiction films, and the lead writer and producer for Light Street Studios. Richard, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me on the show today.
Right. Maybe you can start off just by telling us a little bit about this specific documentary and how you got involved with it.
Sure. Well, the documentary is not about conversion therapy per se. It's not a film about that kind of presents stats and data. It does follow one individual through conversion therapy, which for people who aren't familiar, conversion therapy is, I will preface by saying I'll use the word therapy in quotation marks whenever I talk about it, but it's a therapy that intends to change the sexual orientation of an individual. In my experience shooting the film, it's only been applied to males. They run a whole wide range of ages. But yeah, and it's also only been trying to change the sexual orientation from homosexual to heterosexual. In the film, I follow one individual who's mid-20s when the film was shot. I just follow his individual journey, and it's being a skeptic of the therapy and in witnessing kind of the damaging effects that it can have on an individual. I will say that there isn't really a progression as much as there's a digression of this one individual as it goes through it. But it's ultimately a cautionary tale of the struggle between religious dogmatic belief system and kind of like self-identity, and in this case, sexual orientation.
And okay.
No, he brought something up that leads into one of my questions, which I'm happy about. I was going to say that the stats kind of speak for themselves as far as the victims are concerned. But I wanted to know, since you had brought it up, specifically what changes you saw in this individual, and like essentially what were the effects of this therapy at the end of the day from your point of view?
Well, the film plays out over the course of 2 years, and the way it's presented, it's all chronological. So it follows a nice arc from a story standpoint, where the arc is mostly internal emotions of this one individual character. When I first started shooting the film, the reason I think that they kind of allowed me to shoot it was they were both the therapist and the main subject, who is the client of the therapist. They were both, I would assume, thinking that they could use this as kind of a promotional piece of conversion therapy and the potential benefits. As the film progressed and as I continued to shoot, the main subject started to struggle mightily with all the confusion that comes with going through this. I mean, he's living a closeted lifestyle, so yet he had in the film, you meet one of his friends who happens to also be gay, and that's the one moment in the film where you actually see him being happy, which is very tragic because shortly thereafter they sever the relationship, and that's when things start to spiral out of control. So, I mean, just the general response, I would say, is just depression. And that comes in many forms, and a lot of times that's internalized, and also, half the film takes place in the actual therapy sessions, so it's great for exposition. As a filmmaker, people say a lot of times what they feel, and that's great to actually get inside the heads of people. And that was kind of just a convenience of the setting of the film. But yeah, I mean, it's just a general depression, and you know, just the individuals that I've found that have gone to conversion therapy, because I've talked to many others. You know, it's just every single person who goes into it go in with shame. I mean, shame is the #1 thing, and that's a very, very sad reality. But they're living a shameful lifestyle, being that they are attracted to men, because that's all I've met with men. And you know, it's kind of reinforcing self-hate in a lot of ways. So you can imagine kind of the inner turmoil that exists when that type of dynamic is at play.
I want to get back to the shame a little bit later, but first I want you to talk about the fly-on-the-wall approach that you purposefully took in this. What's been the reaction to that? What were some of the benefits of it? What do you think are shortcomings or problems that it might have raised?
Sure. So the film, Fly on the Wall, so it's observational. There's a few title cards that kind of offer context, but everything is just used. We just present the film as it is. You know, that's an aesthetic, stylistic choice that I, the filmmaker, used, but also that might have been the only way I was able to get in the room and actually shoot these therapy sessions. You know, it took a lot of courting and a lot of, you know, research done on the therapist's part to try to vet me out to make sure I wasn't a gay activist, which I'm not. And I would definitely say I'm an ally of the LGBTQ community, but you know, it's not like I have a blog, you know, supporting, kind of aligned with gay activism. So he allowed me in the room for that reason. Also, I think in large part it was the idea that I wanted to spend time with these individuals. I wanted them to kind of tell their story just in the footage alone. And, you know, I didn't want to just have a very, very small glimpse into this world. And therefore, you know, because people in this community, the therapist mentor, his name is Richard Cohen. I mean, he's had appearances on a lot of media outlets, and, you know, he looks rather foolish in every single one of them. I mean, rightfully so a lot of the times. And I think they're very, very leery. And most of the time, any type of media outlet who has actually approached them, you know, they just get a glimpse, get an interview, and then that's it. They don't try to offer a larger context to get to know them. So I think the fly on the wall, probably the only way I was able to get in the room, but it was also an aesthetic that as a filmmaker I wanted to kind of adhere to.
Being able to see this from that perspective, I did want to know if you think that if Christianity was to blame itself, or if the hate is separate from Christianity and it just happens to be a tool for them to use. I don't know if you were able to even get that sense of that. And if it's not based on Christianity, I wanted to know what therapists are basing their practices on.
Well, anyone I've met has usually come from some type of a religious basis. Anyone that's either gone into the therapy or practicing the therapy. Okay. So, I mean, my personal opinion is Christianity, or just religious belief in general, is the underpinning which kind of creates the self-hate. Mm-hmm.
What are they basing their therapy on, though? Like, it's certainly, we can agree that they're probably coming from a religious place. But are there any therapy techniques that they use that they glean from other types of therapy that they bring to bear here, or is it something that they come up with on their own based on religious stuff?
Yeah, I mean, there's always an underlying, I mean, there's a lot of like anecdotes about religion, and there's a lot of citing from the Bible, but the practices that I witness and the practices that I hear are most common today are typical kind of behavioral therapy. Definitely pushes the boundaries, of course. You know, I've had a couple of therapists and counselors watch the film and kind of raise questions about the ethics of certain aspects that the therapist kind of brought to the table. But yeah, it's not anything like they do like processing that a lot of the times, and if you've seen the film, it's you know, raises a lot of red flags, but actually what they're doing and the efficacy of what they're doing. But you know, a lot of it's just talk therapy. It's psychoanalysis, where it's just trying to uncover the unconscious motivations behind particular actions, and kind of ridiculously slow. So the whole premise. Well, the whole premise is mostly that homosexuality is a sin. They don't really say that, but that's the whole premise that most people, you know, come into this thinking. But the premise is that it's not. It's learned behavior, so it can be unlearned, and it's rooted in kind of some history well.
Right. So I wanted to touch on the ethics again there. That, when I was watching the film, there seemed several points where Nathan was maybe ready to make some kind of breakthrough or move in a very positive direction for himself, and that Chris, as the therapist, routinely would draw him back to the religious answer, whereas a therapist is hopefully helping a person work through their problems. And this therapist, maybe he thought he was doing well because this is his religious belief and he thinks this is a sin, but was it hard for you to maintain that fly-on-the-wall aspect? Like, did you see times when you wanted to stop the therapist and say, yeah, Nathan, you're right, here's your path to happiness, go with what you're feeling? How did you maintain that neutrality throughout?
Yeah, sorry, I cut out there for a second, but yeah, it was a struggle. A lot of times you would want to intervene. I mean, this is as much as it seems so ludicrous, it is a professional kind of therapeutic setting to a certain degree. So I definitely didn't want to interrupt there, at least in the hours that they were actually, Nathan, the main subject, was on the clock. But yeah, oftentimes I would want to push back and/or offer some kind of opposing opinions about things to Nathan. But I knew that in doing so, I would also most likely run the risk of losing access to the story. So that was always kind of a kind of a story consideration, but also an ethical consideration as I'm shooting the film. You don't want to frustrate the subjects or raise any red flags with the subjects so that the access would be cut off, particularly when you're following a particular narrative and trying to have a dramatic arc within the narrative. The minute you cut off is the minute there's a huge hole in the story. So yeah, I mean, it's as a filmmaker sitting in the room. I mean, you'd walk out of, I'd be driving home like 2 hours from these therapy sessions, and I would, be a lot of thinking, and there's a lot of soul searching as well.
Yeah, on the area of shame that you brought up earlier, also, Robert Trivers is an evolutionary biologist, and he wrote a book called The Folly of Fools, and he goes into it there that living a closeted life can have very severe health repercussions. And so I wonder if you can talk about conversion therapy, your understanding of separating it from its efficacy, which may be non-existent, but even if it did work, what is the harm that's potentially done to all these people, especially minors that are going through it?
Well, I mean, from what I've seen, as I said, there was a lot of depression, there was a lot of anxiety, but from other experiences and other accounts, there is an increase in suicide rates for people who go through conversion therapy. And I don't know if it's necessarily the process of going through conversion therapy or if it's just continued reinforcement of that self-hate and shame. Most mental health illnesses and issues that you can think of, including depression and anxiety and suicide rates and kind of ostracizing yourself from the social world, kind of secluding yourself. I mean, there's a whole bevy that, kind of draws people into the closets, the proverbial closet, but also into a social closet where, the only people you actually feel understand your issue are the people that are going through it. And so it kind of reinforces these camps that actually exist in these social circles. Those are the only people that know your issue and feel your pain, and it almost just creates, in a way, more of a market for the people who are offering the services, if that makes sense.
Did Nathan do this, the subject, right? Did he enter into this, did he seek out the therapy, or was it suggested or peer pressured onto him by family, etc.? I just want to get an idea of why he would be in conversion therapy.
Sure, he did it voluntarily. The story is that his mom kind of recommended it. So once he came out to his parents, he came, and this is expressed in the film in the conversation he has with his really close friend. He comes out to his parents, but in telling them that I've had these experiences, he's also saying, but I'm going to change it. And then the follow-up to that, his mom says, whoa, there's this thing called conversion therapy. And he's like, oh, yes, I'm very aware. And then there's this therapist that lives nearby. So that's kind of the genesis of him actually going into the therapy itself. I do think there's a confluence of reasons for why he goes in. I think I mean, he's a consenting adult, so he is the one choosing to go in. I do think that there's certain social pressure, I'm sure. I mean, he lives in, you know, a very rural area of Virginia. He has very right-wing conservative political leanings, as well as, you know, being very, very pious himself. His family and most of the people that he keeps in his social circle are also very much that way. So, you know, there's definitely that sort of implied nudging in that direction, I'm sure, from his community, but he also was the one that willingly went into it.
I mean, it sounds like he was struggling with it. I just don't understand how he can know that the struggle is real, that it's not. I guess what I want to know is, when he went in, did he believe that he was going to be able to make the decision to stop, or what was he expecting? Because the science is pretty clear on sexual orientation. What were his expectations going in, and how were those met or not met?
Well, surprisingly, as much as you, me, and Rob here probably think the science is settled, like I said, you go into those certain communities, I mean, they will argue against that point. So, I mean, you got to start from that foundational idea to understand that, you know, they don't believe that sentiment that you just expressed, that I would agree with, sure, for sure. The way he expressed it to me is he was testing conversion therapy and wanted to give this a go as kind of a last-ditch effort. So he was trying his best, I guess the way I would express it, to repress his sexuality, and I guess that wasn't working, so he needed a little bit of an assistance, so he went into it for that reason, and at least that's what he expressed to me. I'm sure anyone who goes and pays money for a particular therapy, I'll put this one in quotation marks again, but of course they are hoping that there's some level of efficacy, or that there's going to be some you know, betterment to their well-being in some way.
Yeah, you know, I think I mentioned this to you when we talked before the show, but Darrell Ray is the head of Recovering from Religion. He has a book called The God Virus, and he talks about in there how religion creates these pseudo-problems that only religion can solve, and they're permanent problems, so it keeps the person coming back to religion for the answer, and they can't stop whatever the thing is on their own, and therefore they keep sinning, and therefore they have to keep coming back to the priest to keep temporarily fixing it. And I would love for people to read that book and watch your documentary in concert, because, you know, I haven't read the book in a few years, but there seemed a lot of the themes that he hits on, you really ended up demonstrating well how just Nathan actually went through those processes and how he was, you know, kind of sucked in. And we can say as an adult, you know, he's a consenting adult, he made his own decisions, but that's only in a given context. He made those decisions because of the way he's brought up, the community he lives in, all that extra baggage. Yes?
Perfect. No one's going to say that. I was going to say, he was born into it, and he had Christianity forced upon him from the time he was a baby. And apparently part of that was homosexuality is wrong. They really were, you know, they really impressed that apparently on him. Because it seems to be pretty deep-seated that he believes it despite himself. He knows he's gay, it sounds like, to me. But he wants to not be that because of the beliefs that he was brought up with.
Yeah, I would say one of the most tragic moments in the film for me is that, you know, just around the end of the second act, I mean, he admits the very thing that you said, is that he admits to the therapist that there's no therapy on this earth that will ever get me to want to be with a woman, I mean, in that way, and marry a woman. So there's an admission that, yes, I am gay, but, you know, he continues to go forward with it because, I guess in his eyes, it's not worth living a life of sin, because he does have such strong religious convictions. Instead, he'd rather live the pained life, but be doing something that he deems to be, you know, worthy of Scripture or of his just religious belief system in general.
Often, I know Christians often like to bring up bearing the cross. Did he at any point give you the impression that after he admitted he was gay, that this was sort of his cross to bear kind of thing, where he would, even though he couldn't cure it, maybe that wasn't the point, right? That it was trying to have him find God deeper or something. Because I hear that a lot from, you know, Christians. They'll say, well, it was a test. You know, God was just trying to you know, give me some difficulties because, you know, Christ died on the cross and all that stuff. You know, a Christ-like kind of appeal to suffering, I guess. Did he ever come to that conclusion? I hope not.
Well, I mean, he's never like explicitly expressed that to me, but I do think that there is a little bit of that going on. I mean, I do think, you know, particularly being Catholic, he looks at this as a challenge. He looks at suffering as, you know, a thing that's worthy of engaging in. And so, yeah, I do think that might even been the fundamental reason why he even allowed his story to be told, because, you know, this was a challenge to him, and, you know, in the process of actually documenting it, you're just essentially allowing others to see it, and they're even like disseminating it more so. And I think ultimately when he got involved, as I said, I think the hope was, or the idea was, that this was going to be a success story.
Yeah, I mean, considering he's Catholic and watching what Mother Teresa did and all the lives that she exploited for her own benefit and the suffering they went through, and just so sad. I don't know how to say anything more than that.
Well, it's funny even bring up Mother Teresa. I think people probably have, people that have read Christopher Hitchens' book, you know, some people have one view of her, some people still see her as a saint, some people think she fought poverty, some people...
No, she didn't.
Don't. So, you know, in that vein, I'm not sure what your exact target audience for this was. Maybe you can talk about that a little bit. And have you, I know it was just released, so I don't know how much information and feedback you have yet, but have you seen or are you expecting different reactions from, you know, conservative religious people, people that are LGBT primarily, people that are active, you know, secular activists that have studied the harm of religion and, you know, make all the nuanced points? You know, what reactions have you seen so far?
So yeah, we sort of had a soft release this past week. We screened the film with a couple of organizations, several organizations, either in the LGBTQ space, some secular humanist groups, and then some counseling groups. There are three vastly different target demographics, but they also have vastly different opinions, and then they have subsectors of responses. You know, actually, one thing that we're experiencing is that there's a lot of people in the gay community that are expressing just how challenging the film is. You know, it almost needs to come with a trigger warning, because anyone who's either gone through it and has not come out positively on the other side, gone through conversion therapy, that is, or is still struggling with this kind of faith, sexual identity issue. It is very, very triggering for them, and I do think the kind of fly on the wall style that we shot it in makes it even more challenging, because it doesn't offer any type of editorializing whatsoever in the film. It's straight as it is, and it's very, very brutally real in the actual footage that we have, and you're witnessing this individual's pain firsthand, very close up.
Yeah, I can imagine that being triggering. You can very well imagine that being triggering. I'm sorry, continue.
And that, as far as like the counseling world, there's a lot of people in the you know, counseling, psychology. They you know, it's kind of a portal into a world that, you know, has not been exposed much, particularly in nonfiction. So it's just more of the fascination and intrigue that comes from that. A lot of people watch it with a very, very critical eye on the practices. So it's almost just a critique of another one of their colleagues, if they would even call therapists their colleague. And so yeah, I mean, there's different responses so far. There's been different responses so far. But you know, that's what you're going to get with the film. That's, you know, that's kind of something that's out of your control, in the sense of it's a narrative you're following, as opposed to a thesis you're presenting.
Yeah, it didn't sound like you were trying to tell a story on top of what he was doing, right? You were just saying, like, this is this dude's life. And, you know, I think part of it is a lot of people might watch it and want to step in and help, right? They get that feeling they want to help, but they can't. That would certainly be, for me, I would probably have a hard time watching it because of that. Right?
Well, I would say from our screening that one thing that was very successful in it, I think, is stimulating conversation, because you don't spell out, here's how you should feel about this. You really just present it. And again, I think people are going to come to the film with a range of their own experiences and how much they've looked into religion and various things, and you will get really interesting discussions that are hopefully productive. So, I think it worked well in a lot of ways.
Absolutely, I agree with that.
Let's jump to if we can talk about the difference between minors and adults now, and what if we reach the conclusion that this is a bad procedure, it can really harm people, especially if you're a minor and you don't have a choice. Where are minors protected for this? What kind of legislation is being sought to protect them? And how does our current political climate, affect that?
So off the bat, conversion therapy is legal for consenting adults in all states. There's no federal ban to it. But for minors, there's a ban in 9 states and the District of Columbia. There's been a couple of states, maybe 4 states this past year that have passed bans for minors. So there does seem to be sort of kind of a galvanizing force. I do know that the conservative Republican state legislators are not very prone to wanting to pass it, just from the kind of religious protection standpoint. So you're not going to get any action from any type of red states on a statewide level. There is a piece of legislation in the federal House, which Bob Pedlew, who's a congressman from California. That's essentially dead upon arrival, at least right now, under the Republican administration and Republicans powering in the House and Senate. So what most people are doing now is they're finding more success on a county-wide level or on a municipal level. So there's just a lot of action there. But one thing I find is that this is oftentimes being practiced outside of the cities that are usually more progressive, where there are kind of welcoming people. But the bans need to be more focused in the rural areas in some of the southern states, of course, where this is more prevalent.
I mean, to me, this is just child abuse. It's just another form of child abuse, and I don't necessarily think it should be coddled, to be quite frank. It should be called what it is. It's child abuse, and at least for adults, consenting or not, it's abuse. It has no efficacy, right? I mean, in the states where they banned it for kids, what was the basis on which they banned it?
The lack of efficacy.
Yeah.
And the harm that it could possibly.
Yeah. So if it can harm kids and there's no efficacy for it, then why would that be different for adults? It doesn't really matter if they consent. It doesn't work.
Well, this almost can tie back, and hopefully you didn't lose Richard there. This ties back, your last story that you presented was about anti-vaccination and pseudoscience. Richard, you started the documentary with Dr. Oz, right, where the therapist, and maybe you can just tell people that opening scene with the therapist and Dr. Oz. And adults are allowed to do dumb things, unfortunately. But yeah, if you could talk, are you still there with us?
Oh, he went away. Boo.
Well, so hopefully we will get Richard back. We'll see if they can work on that in the back room. So I'll answer that question. Just, the documentary starts where the therapist is speaking with Dr. Oz, who, somebody we've talked about before as somebody who really gives a huge platform for all these bogus therapies that don't work, that don't have any scientific grounding. And so now this therapist has a national platform to say that I know this work because guess what? I too was gay, as it turns out, and I went through this, and now I'm 8 years straight and happy. And then he promises various things. And hey, Richard, you back with us?
I am. Sorry about that.
Excellent. So I was just sort of giving a little intro to the Dr. Oz scene that you opened the story with, since one of our stories here was about pseudoscience. And maybe you can tell us, if you can say, why did you choose to start that with Dr. Oz? What context does that put that conversion therapy in from your point of view?
Sure. So we used the Dr. Oz clip mostly because the therapist that is featured in the film, that was the best video footage we had of him engaging in some other type of media outlet. And we also, because we shot the film completely observationally and there's very little editorializing, very little explaining outside of the therapy sessions themselves, we did want to at least offer some insight into the therapy itself. In the clip that we use, Dr. Oz claims rightfully that it's dismissed and recommended against by all major medical associations, therapeutic counseling associations, and he questions the efficacy of it himself. We wanted to at least start the film with that idea right off the bat.
Yeah, and I would hate to ever give Dr. Oz props because I think he does so much damage with his actual MD promoting all sorts of nonsense. But I appreciate that you told me that in this, he actually did appear to, throughout the clip, you said, have people on pointing out the harms of this and that it wasn't scientifically well-grounded.
Oh yeah, I mean, you had said earlier a lot of these religions will invent things to cure so they can cure it themselves.
Right, it gives them a permanent clientele. What was the money situation? Because I wasn't aware there were any payments being made to the therapist until somewhere in the film you mentioned that he even offered to continue therapy without any more payments. So is this something that Chris was a licensed psychotherapist that also happened to be a devout Catholic, or what was the money and religion tied there?
So there was money. It was a monthly therapy session, so he would come to the therapist, Chris, once a month, and it was transactional for sure. Somewhere in the film, when I was describing when things started to hit the fan and there was a lot of grieving and a lot of depression on the part of the main character, there was a point which was one of two times where I was actually told to turn off the camera, and the therapist actually tried to console the individual and said that recognized the anguish that he was dealing with. In that session, he told him more so that he needs more therapy, which at the time, I kind of rolled my eyes, just thinking, of course he needs more therapy if he's paying for it, just just more money in his pocket. But he did offer, a couple minutes later to do the therapy session for free. So yeah, definitely it was transactional, and there was a sort of, I hate to say it, a charitable aspect to the increase in therapy sessions.
I mean, look, I'm in therapy, and I've been in therapy before. Good therapist, a decent therapist, a science-based therapist will want you out of their office as soon as they can. Sure, they get paid, to help you, but the bottom line is, if you don't do better, they aren't doing their job. If they're not doing their job, eventually, someone's going to find out and they're going to get fired. I feel like in these situations, the religious faith lets them kind of ignore the lack of efficacy, ignore all the failures. And I don't know if this is how on the ball this is in your experience, but it seems very predatory, and it doesn't seem like that the therapist cares much about whether or not he ends up straight or whatever. It seems that he's more focused on how much money he can get out of him.
Well, I mean, having seen the film, I don't know how much of it was money for the therapist. I really didn't feel that the therapist ever had Nathan's interest at heart. I think he was strictly working for the religion. Now, I don't know how much of that happens strictly subconsciously and how much of it is that he knows, to be serving the religious institution, he needs to keep this guy on this particular path. Did you get any kind of insights into the therapist and how genuine he was? How is he a nice person that's doing his best to help and he's just acting on really bad information?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the most complicated questions I faced during the shooting, and I still don't even know if I have an answer to it. I came in thinking that the project was going to be just another snake oil salesman who's just got all these people following him, and he's offering them pseudoscience and taking advantage of them. As I started to shoot, one part of my mind said that's still there, I think, but the other part was saying I think this guy is compassionate. It might be completely misplaced and completely unfounded, but based on the belief system that he has, one part of my brain said I think he's trying to be compassionate for this other individual, and that complicates things for me greatly. I mean, it doesn't make the practice itself, or even having the clientele, it doesn't make it right, but it does get into kind of a very, very complex conversation about motivation.
I mean, there's the one thing that I've brought with, or the one thing that I try to hold to is that someone might be quite caring. I usually bring it up in this context. The parents that kill their kids with praying without taking them to the hospital, they don't hate their kids, right? They love their kids. They want their kids to live. They want the best for their kids. The problem is they believe things about the world that are not true, and those untruths can be quite harmful, especially in, say, this case. I can't speak to the motivations of the therapist. I'm certainly not him, and Richard's had more contact with him than I. But if he seems compassionate, then it seems like he falls into that category of people that wants to do the right thing but believes bad things about the world, and so his good intentions end up causing harm, instead of what they would,
Did you have any inkling if there's any path for Chris to be open to more conventional therapy about what he's doing? Because it eventually comes out that he's not what most of us would call happy with his life either. Or is that just something, as a director and producer who's remaining objective, that's a boundary that you can't cross?
Well, no, I mean, I don't. It would all be kind of subjective opinion about where Chris is in his life. I mean, to your point originally of practicing other types of therapies, and I've never seen it, but he is trying to broaden kind of his therapeutic practice. He's towards the end of the film. There's a therapy session where Nathan sits down with his mom and dad, so it's the family therapy session. Where they kind of talk about their history and how it ties to, as they call same-sex attraction. And I think for Chris, his practice will start to migrate in that direction. I still think it's always rooted in kind of a religious fundamental basis. And that's kind of where he's recruiting most of his clients as well. But I know he's still expanding. He's expanding to more family therapy, but yet he's still dealing with most of his clients are struggling with sexual orientation in some way.
Does he have some background in psychology or something that qualifies him to be a therapist, or is this just a religious guy that decided, I'm going to go counsel my religious friends?
No, I mean, he's a licensed counselor in the state of Virginia. And yeah, I mean, he went to school, he got his master's, but yeah, I mean, it's. I guess it's like I said. There's no bans, so you can be a licensed professional counselor in a particular state, and so long as you don't have any complaints or your license isn't revoked, you can practice this. One thing during the process of shooting, it didn't actually make the film, but the therapist does host these kind of seminars where he'll bring people in and he'll try to train them on how to deal with this issue, how to kind of be able to sit down and do what they would hope would be formal, but seem very, very informal kind of counseling sessions, all in which are dealing with, this issue of homosexuals wanting to change their sexual orientation. And most of those people that I met at that seminar just came from their particular congregations, and that was kind of, it seemed like that was their niche that they wanted to be able to provide to their community. But they weren't necessarily getting any type of licensing from a state or governmental body,
and
which was a little frightening.
I say, to the degree that these are licensed psychologists or some quasi-medical fields, a lot of those have governing bodies that even if there's not, if we can't politically pass laws to ban this treatment for minors right now, that doesn't mean that the American Psychiatric Association, American Psychology Association, that they can't pass ethical guidelines. Is that an open avenue to explore? To curtail
I
this
think it would be. Yeah, I think it would be. I don't know enough about the details of the power of the American Psychological Association. Yeah, of course they do have guidelines, and they've spoken vehemently against conversion therapy, but I don't really know what power that has on a statewide kind of licensing basis. It doesn't seem like it has much. The therapist that was the mentor for the therapist in the movie, he had his license revoked, but that was because of fraudulent practices and whatnot. So, I mean, I think if anything, instead of trying to unless it's a state where it's actually banned, the only way you would be able to ban it is if you found some type of faulty practice within it.
Well, yeah, I guess I was specifically thinking of, like the American Medical Association is a national thing that lots of the doctors would belong to, and there's several of those organizations with national reach. And if they set out ethical guidelines, again, it struck me that there were multiple times during those courses of therapy that it really didn't look like Chris had Nathan's interest remotely at heart. Or at least he was, in his own eyes he may have, but he wasn't putting himself in Nathan's point of view and seeing will this help or hurt him. And I wonder if ethical guidelines from those governing bodies could make it where you can't do this kind of practice, even if the law hasn't forbid it. It just says outside the ethics.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can't speak to the specifics of the sessions that I actually witnessed, and I don't know like if any of those practices themselves are kind of impeachable offenses, if you will. I know that in conversations I've had, as I said previously, with therapists and counselors, there does seem to be a lot of questions raised about practices and kind of the ethical treatment. So yeah, I do think it's a consideration as the movie has like a wider release. I will be curious what the reaction is from that community. And watching this footage, and if there will be any type of action, I don't know. That was a risk, I guess, the therapist took in providing access and allowing the story to be documented and also disseminated.
I mean, I wanted to know, as we're running out of time, if you think that this movie, while like you said, you went in, or the therapist might have gone into it thinking, well, oh, this will be a great, PR story for me. Do you think that this might be a good cautionary tale for people to be like, look, I mean, you can do it, but it doesn't work, and here's a good example of what you might go through?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the exact language I use. This is a cautionary tale. I mean, my takeaway from the end of the film is you can go through this whole process, spend 2 years focused on trying to change your sexual orientation, and it's going to be a very fruitless effort and a very, very traumatic effort. So cautionary tale, it definitely is. I hope that's the takeaway from anyone who's on the fence, or any person in any individual in a support system, whether or not that's a family member, a parent who is struggling with this issue, or a parent who has a kid who's struggling with this issue and they're considering this as an option. I hope that they receive it. It might deter them. I mean, that's the ultimate outcome that I would hope people would take away from it.
Richard, in 10 seconds, where can people go to find out more about this and other work that you do?
So there was a graphic on the bottom of the screen, sundaysessionsmovie.com. You can visit our website. There's pretty much all the information you want about the film.
Thank you so much for joining us.
So, all
right, thank you. Have a great day.
Yep. Thank you. Take care. Bye.
Yeah.